What's up, guys? Welcome back, man. Hope you guys are doing all right. I know I say this every week, but I love you guys and I miss you guys so much. I'm looking forward to that day when we can chill together again. We can hang out together again and talk about Jesus again. I miss you guys. So I hope you're doing well. Leave us a comment sometime. Let us know that you're doing all right. Reach out to your small group leaders, man. They want to hear from you. But hey, we're going to go ahead and get started. I have a few announcements that I want to mention. Hey, Grace's stepfather had a heart attack recently. Man, be praying for her and her stepfather for sure. Reach out to Grace, man. We love Grace and we love her presence and we love having her around. Reach out to her and let her know that you're thinking of her and her stepfather and that you're praying for them for sure. They definitely need that right now. So reach out to her and let her know that you're praying for her. Also, I would love to know what you're reading in your daily Bible study. If you would comment below what you're reading or what you're going through, we want to know about that. We want to hear about that and celebrate that. I'm currently going through the book of Philippians, and I just read the part about complaining and grumbling. Yeah, that kind of hit me hard. But I would love to hear what you guys are reading, so feel free to comment below on this video or comment on our Instagram posts or even DM us on Instagram. We want to hear from you, and we want to hear what you're reading. We want to celebrate that for sure. Also, I want to say I'm super proud of our student leaders. They did a great job this last Wednesday, man. They killed it. I'm super thankful for them. If you haven't, reach out to them and be like, hey, good job, bro. I was really impressed with Wednesday's lesson. I thought it was super awesome. So reach out to them for sure. But hey, we're going to go ahead and get started. We've been talking about big time faith in our Sunday school lessons, the last two lessons. And so if you remember last week, we talked about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and how they had resolved to follow God even when it didn't make a whole lot of sense and even when everyone else was doing something different. And it was a small thing, remember, it was about what to eat. And they'd resolved to follow God with even the small things. And God goes on to use them in a big time way. And so today we're going to continue with that theme of big time faith. And we're actually going to look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, we've already heard of this story. We've read this story before. It's about when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get thrown into the blazing furnace. However, I'm going to read this story. I'm going to give some background. I'm going to read this story. And I just really want to focus on just a few verses that I feel like God kind of highlighted to me while I was studying for this lesson. Okay. So first, let me give some background. Again, King Nebuchadnezzar is still the king. And if you haven't picked this up, King Nebuchadnezzar is pretty conceited. He thinks he's pretty big time. He thinks he's super dope, and he's not super dope, okay? But he comes up with this decree, and he builds this insane statue, this really big time statue, this big statue made out of gold, and he brings everyone, all the officials in, and like all the governors and the officials and the advisors, and he brings them in. He says, all right, anytime you hear the sound of music, of any kind of music, you need to turn and face my golden statue and bow down and worship it. If you don't worship my golden statue that I've created, then I will throw you into a furnace. A furnace is like a big bonfire. I'm going to throw you into a fire, okay? And that's what he says. And so the officials go back to their own cities, the advisors and the officials go back to their own cities, and they communicate this to their cities and to their villages, okay? So I'm going to pick up in Daniel chapter 3, verse 4, okay? So follow along with me if you can. Daniel chapter 3, verse 4. And this character that's going to pop up is called a herald, and a herald is just someone who speaks for the king, okay? So verse 4, it says, then the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every tongue, this is what you were commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Then we're going to skip a little bit further. Let's go to verse 8. Okay, verse 8. Now, the king made this decree, and they played some music, and everyone bowed down and worshiped the image of gold. But there were 3 significant people who didn't. Only 3 significant people that didn't bow down and worship, and that was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're going to see what happens here. Look at verse 8 with me. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." So basically, they're tattletales, right? These people come up and they're like, "Hey, these Jews that you've set up, these Jewish officials that you've set up over the affairs of Babylon, they're not paying attention to you and they're not worshiping your God. So what are you going to do about it, King Nebi?" And obviously, King Nebuchadnezzar is pretty upset, right? He made a decree, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not following that decree, so he's pretty upset. So basically, what's going to happen here is Nebuchadnezzar is going to call them in. Nebuchadnezzar really liked Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He really liked them. And so he's going to call those 3 in to his court, to his palace, whatever. He's going to call them in, and he's going to say, "All right, I've heard that you're not going to bow down and worship this idol, so I'm going to give you another chance. Here's the idol right here. I'm going to play some music, and I want you to bow down to it and worship it." And we're going to see what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's response is. So let's look at verse 16. Now, keep in mind, King Nebuchadnezzar's kind of frustrated. He's kind of mad right here. It actually says he's furious. And so basically Nebuchadnezzar is like, "All right, if you don't worship this idol, then I'm going to throw you into a furnace." And if you look at verse 15, at the very end, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Then what God is going to save you from my hand?" Okay? What God is going to rescue you from me? So look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." Verse 25, he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." So that's a mouthful. That's a long story, but it's pretty incredible. So they wouldn't worship this idol, and so Nebuchadnezzar is ticked off and mad. He binds them and throws them into the furnace. But what happens? They don't burn up, and actually, there's a fourth person that shows up with them. And then he calls Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to come out, and he basically says, "Man, that was amazing. Whoever speaks a bad word against your God, I'm going to make sure I kill, because no other God can save in this same way." So Nebuchadnezzar was really wowed. A few things that I want you to get out of this. First off, I want you to think about this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, historians assume and kind of gather that these men were no older than 14, 15, or 16 years old, right around that time, right around that age. So they were young. And these were some of the bravest men that we see in the Bible, being that young. So there's two things that I want you to gather from this story, and I want you to think about. The first thing is a question. I want to know, who are you in with? And what I mean by that is, who are your friends? Okay, who are your friends? Who are you riding with? Because this story clearly tells us that you need people to run with. It's difficult to run after Christ as a lone Christian, as a lone wolf kind of Christian. You can't do that. You need people in with you. That's actually why God created the church, is for you to be surrounded with people that are like-minded and will run after Jesus with you. So who are you in with? Who are you running with? I want you to think about this. If only one of these men had chosen not to bow down to the idol, would it have been much more difficult? I think it would have been. But remember, even going back to last week's lesson, these three men resolved to follow Christ, to follow God no matter what. They resolved to follow God no matter what. No matter what came. And so these three men decided together that they weren't going to bow down and worship the idol. And this shows us that, man, we need people to run. Listen, being friends with people who are not followers of Christ, that's okay. That's not a bad thing. But this clearly shows us that we need a hub. We need a central hub, a central headquarters where we can connect with people who will push us after Jesus. If you are one of those students that are like, well, I don't need Christian friends. I'm just going to hang out with my unchristian friends and I'll be all right. Listen, that's a recipe for disaster. You need Christian fellowship around you. That's why God created the church, so we could come here, so we could worship together, so we could grow closer together and closer to Christ. It's so much easier to stand up for God when you have other people that are standing with you. And that's what's happening here. Everyone else bowed down, but these three men were like, no, we're not doing this. We're doing this together. We're going to choose to follow God. So that's the first thing I want to ask. Who are you in with? I would encourage you to get a hub of Christians around you that will not just Christians, but people that will push you towards Jesus. And that will greatly benefit your walk with Christ, I promise you. So who are you in with? Who you run with is very important. And then the second question that I want to ask is, what do you worship? And I want us to think about this. We were created to worship something. Everyone, look around, everyone worships something. People in the world are worshiping money. People in the world are worshiping sex. People in the world are worshiping fame, good grades, sports, athletes. People are, whatever's out there, people are worshiping it. You were created to worship something. And what that means is like, you were created basically to gawk after something, to run after something and to treasure something. You were created. It's in our nature to treasure something. And I want to know what you worship. Here's the deal. I want us to look at verse 16 again. Look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this manner. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve or the God we worship is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. The problem with the world is that we worship the wrong things. The world worships the wrong things. The world knows that it was created to worship something. Everyone's running, everyone's chasing after something because we were created that way. But the problem is that we worship the wrong things. We were created to worship God fully. That's what we were created to do. We were created to treasure God and to worship God, but people are worshiping the wrong things. And so what do you worship? And here's the thing. A lot of you probably are like, well, I worship God. But I want you to ask yourself this question. I want you to think back to a time like that you might have been praying. Have you ever prayed a prayer something like, God, I will give you all of my life, but I just want this thing over here? Or have you prayed something like, God, if you would just do this one thing for me, then I will follow you fully? Or have you prayed something like, God, if you would just reveal yourself in this way, then I will believe you? Let me ask you this. Well, let me tell you this. Whatever that thing is that you're saying, well, if you just do this one thing, then I'll follow you. Or if I can just have this one piece of me, then I'll give you everything else. Whatever you're holding, that's what you're worshiping. You're not worshiping God. I remember back when I was in high school, I worshiped basketball. I loved basketball. I was pretty good. I mean, I was all right. I was a good player. But I remember multiple times that I would pray and I'd be like, God, I want your will for my life, but it's going to be in basketball. Like, I knew that I was going to go to the NBA, whatever. But I was like, God, whatever you have for me, I want for my life, but it needs to be in basketball. That's what I would say. And listen, I know for a fact that some of our students are praying like that. And I want you to know that whatever you're holding back, that is truly what you're worshiping. In order to worship God, you have to let that go. You can't have any idols before God. You can't hold on to anything to worship God. You have to worship him for who he is. And check this out. A lot of people treat God like a vending machine, right? They say, well, God, if you would just do this, coin. Here's my prayer, coin. And if you would just give me this out of your vending machine, then I'll be happier. Then I'll follow you. God's not a vending machine. Check this out. In verse 18, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they say, but even if he does not, God, even if you don't save us from this furnace, I'm still not going to worship that idol. They tell King Nebuchadnezzar, even if our God doesn't save us from the fire, we still will not follow. We still will not worship your God. And that's the attitude that we have to have. What's interesting is, so they say, our God is able to save us. So they know that God is able. But then they say, even if he does not save us, we're not going to worship you. Why would they say that? Why would they say, even if he would not even if he does not save us. I think that's because God probably might have been quiet in this time. Like, they probably hadn't seen a whole lot of supernatural miracles in a long time. You know, the Old Testament is filled with supernatural miracles and all these things, but we don't really hear about the times when God wasn't really doing all these crazy miracles. And there's times in between scriptures where God isn't doing a whole lot of supernatural things. And so they're saying, listen, we haven't seen God move in a long time. We haven't seen God do something crazy in a long time, but still, we are not going to worship your idol. And so I hope that you guys would think over that. Who are you in with, and what are you worshiping? And I would hope that you wouldn't be treating God like a vending machine. God, if you do this, then I'll be happy. That's not how God works. These men were going to be faithful even if God didn't show up in a supernatural miracle in that way. But even if he does not, we want you to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. I love you guys. I hope that this is a good starter for your discussions in small group. Love you, miss you. Have a great week.